Have you ever caught yourself thinking that if you just had enough faith, everything would just fall into place?
Mm.
It's a powerful idea.
Yeah, it is.
And it's one that I think a lot of people wrestle with.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's a question that's really deeply embedded in, I think, the American psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And it has surprisingly roots going back centuries.
Wow.
So today we're going to kind of unravel the history of this idea, this belief system called the prosperity gospel.
Okay.
Which is basically the idea that God rewards faith with not just spiritual blessings, but material wealth and good health.
Okay, so to help us understand this, we're diving deep into a single source today.
Yes.
Which is the Throughline podcast episode called The Abundant Life.
That's right.
And so we'll be using that episode to kind of trace how this idea has evolved and the impact that it's had.
And I think what's so fascinating about this story is how it connects threads from, like fiery preachers in revival tents to the, polished world of televangelism, even touching on figures like Norman Vincent Peale and Donald Trump. So it really is a cultural journey as much as a religious one.
Yeah. Okay, so to start this journey, we're going to have to rewind the clock a bit.
Okay.
All the way back to the 1600s to the era of the Puritans.
Okay.
And their very strict predestined view of salvation.
Yes. So the Puritans believed that your fate was decided before you were even born.
Whoa.
Heaven or hell.
Oh, wow.
So imagine just the weight of that.
Yeah. I can only imagine that must cause some anxiety.
Absolutely. I mean, how do you handle that kind of pressure, right?
Right. What do you do?
Well, you work hard.
Okay.
So diligence, frugality, worldly success, these all became seen as signs of God's favor.
Interesting.
Not that you could earn your way into heaven, but that you were demonstrating, virtue.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So
is that where we get that idea of like idle hands or the devil's playground?
Exactly.
Oh.
And, this way of thinking, this linking of hard work and morality really shaped, I think, the American identity.
Yeah.
Even Benjamin Franklin, who wasn't particularly religious, promoted a similar gospel of self-improvement in his autobiography.
Right.
Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Exactly. So we've got this foundation now of hard work as being like a sign of, you're in good standing.
Yeah.
But when does this idea of God specifically blessing you with wealth come in?
Well, that shift happens with the Second Great Awakening in the 1800s, which kind of throws out this idea of predestination and emphasizes personal action as the path to salvation.
So now it's like you have a say in your own salvation.
Yes, exactly. And this movement was fueled by these really charismatic preachers like Charles Finney, who went from being a lawyer to leading these huge emotional revival meetings.
Wow.
And he introduced this concept of the anxious bench.
Anxious bench? What is that? Like a 19th century therapy couch?
Well, in a way,
yeah.
It was a designated space right at the front for folks who were kind of wrestling with sin and, temptation.
Oh, wow.
And people would come forward, often quite dramatically, to publicly confess, weep, pray, seeking that born-again experience.
That sounds intense.
Oh, it was intense.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is Finney's emphasis on your actions directly affecting your spiritual fate.
Okay.
Which I think really paves the way for the prosperity gospel as we know it today.
Okay, so I'm following the thread so far, but we're still mostly talking about spiritual well-being here.
Right.
When does material wealth actually enter the picture?
Yeah, that's where the 20th century and the rise of Pentecostalism come in.
Okay.
And there's a shift in emphasis to the power of the Holy Spirit to heal and to empower. And this message really resonated with Black communities who were facing intense injustice at the time and needed that source of hope.
Yeah, so finding strength and agency in a world that was denying them both.
Exactly. And a central figure here is Oral Roberts. He was a preacher who claimed to have been healed from tuberculosis through the power of God.
And he's considered one of the founders of the prosperity gospel, right?
He is.
What made his message so appealing?
Well, he combined that Pentecostal focus on healing with the allure of the American dream.
Okay.
His message was, God wants you healthy and wealthy.
Wow. So it's not just about your soul anymore. It's about your bank account, too.
It's about your whole life, your prosperity.
Interesting.
And Roberts really popularized this idea called seed faith.
Seed faith.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, like planting a seed that'll grow.
Exactly. So the idea is you give generously to the preacher, the sower of the seed, and God will multiply your gift, returning it to you tenfold, 100-fold, even more.
So it's like a divine investment strategy.
You could say that, and this message reached a much wider audience with the advent of television in the 1970s and 80s.
Right.
Oral Roberts was a pioneer of televangelism.
I remember those, like, televised faith-healing spectacles.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They were something else.
It wasn't just Roberts either.
Oh, right.
We had Reverend Ike Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. They became these televangelist superstars,
Yeah.
preaching this gospel of material blessings, broadcasting it right into living rooms across America.
And this is also when we started to see some of those scandals around televangelism, right?
Yeah.
All those questions about their sincerity and their lifestyles and, like, how much money they were making.
Right. Those lines between faith and financial gain got really blurry.
Yeah.
And there were questions about, were they truly serving God or were they serving their own bank accounts?
Right. And I feel like those concerns are still very relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, this is already so fascinating. I'm starting to see how deeply this idea of the prosperity gospel is woven into American culture.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I have to ask, what stands out to you so far? What resonates with your own experiences or beliefs?
That's a great question. I think it's just remarkable how an idea with roots in the 1600s can still be so influential in the 21st century. You know, we see echoes of the prosperity gospel everywhere, from self-help gurus to motivational speakers.
Yeah.
Even in some political rhetoric, it's really something.
It really makes you think.
It does.
Okay, well, let's keep going. I'm ready to dive into how the prosperity gospel evolved in, like, the modern era.
Let's do it. As we move forward, we'll see how it intersects with things like capitalism, self-help.
Oh,
All of that creating this really compelling and potentially problematic narrative about success.
okay, right.
All right. So as we move into like the later part of the 20th century, the prosperity gospel kind of finds fertile ground in the rise of this new economic ideology called neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism.
And yeah, have you heard of that?
I have. But I think for a lot of our listeners who maybe didn't major in economics, we could get a quick breakdown.
Yeah, so basically neoliberalism boils down to the belief that free markets with minimal government intervention are the best way to generate wealth and prosperity for everyone. And it really emphasizes individual responsibility and self-reliance.
That sounds kind of familiar.
Right, it's almost like they're speaking the same language as the prosperity gospel, just in a different dialect.
Yeah.
So both of them emphasize individual effort as the key to success.
Okay.
And the flip side of that is that if you're not prospering, it's because you're not working hard enough.
Right.
Not believing hard enough.
Okay.
You know, structural inequalities, systemic barriers, those things aren't really part of the equation.
So it's a very individualistic worldview in both the spiritual and economic realms.
Yeah, exactly. And this was further amplified by the rise of this idea of the power of positive thinking.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like think positive thoughts and positive things will happen.
Right.
Have you heard of Norman Vincent Peale?
I have. Yeah.
In his book, The Power of Positive Thinking?
Yeah. That's like the OG self-help book.
It really is. And his message really fit in perfectly with the prosperity gospel's emphasis on faith and belief.
Okay.
Right? So it's not enough to just work hard.
Right.
You got to believe that you're going to succeed.
You have to believe.
You know, manifest it.
Okay. So now we've got this, like, potent mix of faith capitalism and self-help.
Right.
All pushing this narrative that success is completely within our control.
It's a very American narrative.
Yeah.
And that narrative became deeply ingrained in American culture, I think.
Yeah.
You know, shaping everything from business practices to personal development, even political discourse.
It's everywhere.
It is.
So the prosperity gospel's clearly spread far beyond the church walls at this point.
Yeah.
But how about the people who actually believe in it?
Yeah.
Like, is it fair to say that they're being taken advantage of by these, you know, kind of flashy preachers?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that historian Kate Bowler explores really well in her work on the prosperity gospel.
Okay.
You know, she spent a lot of time interviewing both preachers and followers, really trying to understand what drives this movement.
So what's her take? Is it all just a scam?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
Bowler argues that while there are definitely some bad actors out there, you know,
Right.
people who are exploiting people's vulnerability, there are also many who genuinely believe in the message they're preaching.
Okay.
You know, they see themselves as empowering people,
Right.
offering hope and tools to improve their lives.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
But what about the followers, though?
Yeah.
What draws them to this message, even when they see people who have, you know, tons of faith, but are still struggling?
Well, Bowler suggests that it's precisely because people are struggling.
Oh,
that they're drawn to this message of hope and possibility.
okay.
It's a way to make sense of suffering and to believe that things can get better, that they deserve to get better,
Right.
if they just have enough faith.
Yeah, it's almost like a spiritual safety net.
Yeah, I like that. And that can be incredibly comforting and motivating for people.
Right.
But it also raises some ethical questions.
Right.
Like what happens when people give their last dollar to a preacher,
Right.
hoping for a miracle that never comes,
Yeah.
or when they blame themselves for their struggles, instead of acknowledging, the systemic factors that might be at play.
Yeah. That's where things get tricky.
Yeah, it makes me think of that, saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime.
Right.
But what if you convince him that the only reason he's not catching any fish is because he's not praying hard enough?
Well, that's a good point.
Right. It shifts the focus from collective solutions and social justice to individual responsibility,
Yeah.
which can be very problematic.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is especially troubling, I think, when you consider the impact on vulnerable communities, especially during times of economic hardship.
Like during the 2008 financial crisis,
Yeah.
when we saw those predatory lending practices targeting Black churches
Right.
with these promises of home ownership,
Mm.
if you just have enough faith, you can achieve the American dream.
Exactly. And that message of faith and financial blessing got really twisted into a tool for exploitation,
Yeah.
preying on people's hopes and dreams.
Yeah. It's a stark example of how a belief system, even if it comes from a good place,
Yeah.
can be distorted and used to cause real harm.
Absolutely. And it highlights why it's so important to be critical thinkers, to question even the most appealing narratives.
Right.
Just because something sounds good doesn't mean it's true or ethical.
Yeah. So how do we navigate this world where these messages of individual empowerment are everywhere,
Right.
whether it's from a preacher, a self-help guru, or even a politician?
That's the big question, and it's one that I think we'll unpack as we move into the final part of our deep dive.
All right, I'm ready for it. This has been eye-opening.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've traced this idea of prosperity gospel from like its Puritan roots all the way to the modern era.
Yeah, from those anxious benches to mega churches and, radio waves to social media feeds.
It's been a journey.
It has been a long journey.
So here we are now in the 21st century.
Right.
And we're facing all these issues, inequality, climate change, all these complex problems. So where does prosperity gospel even fit in with all of that?
Well, it's a great question. And on one hand, it can be really easy to just dismiss it as naive, even harmful.
Yeah.
Especially when you see those, kind of extreme examples of preachers living these lavish lifestyles while their followers are struggling.
It feels very contradictory.
It does. And, prosperity gospel has been criticized for promoting this very materialistic, individualistic worldview that can blind people to injustice and, make them less likely to work together for social change.
Yeah. But then again, I could see how that message of hope and empowerment
Right.
could be really appealing, especially for people who feel like they're on the margins,
Yeah.
like they don't have a voice.
Absolutely. And that's where the nuance comes in, I think.
Sure. Okay.
Because while it offers this sense of agency and control and, you have the power to change your life,
Right.
it also puts the burden of success solely on the individual.
Okay.
So if you're not prospering, it's because you're not believing hard enough, not working hard enough.
Not being positive enough.
Exactly. It's almost like a double-edged sword, right? It
Yeah.
can be motivating, but also potentially very guilt-inducing.
Yeah. Like if things aren't going well, it's your fault.
Exactly. And it's interesting how this message of individual empowerment has kind of moved beyond religion and into secular culture, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, think about those self-help gurus,
Right.
Tony Robbins or Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
They preach very similar gospels of self-reliance and positive thinking.
Even someone like Donald Trump,
Right.
who built his whole persona on wealth and this unshakable belief in himself.
Yeah.
It's almost like he embodies the prosperity gospel, even though he doesn't talk about religion much directly.
That's a really sharp observation.
Yeah.
And it just shows how prosperity gospel's influence really extends way beyond the church.
Yeah.
Those core ideas, personal responsibility, the power of belief, wealth as a sign of God's favor, those have become so ingrained in American culture. You see it in business politics.
Yeah.
Even how we approach personal development.
It's everywhere.
It really is.
So what's the takeaway for us? How do we make sense of this message of individual empowerment
Right.
that's like everywhere, especially when it's so often tied to consumerism and this, relentless pursuit of success?
It's a big question, and there's no easy answer, but I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Recognizing how these messages whether they're coming from a preacher,
Mm.
a self-help guru, a politician,
Right.
how they can shape our beliefs and even our behavior, often without us even realizing it.
So, like, being more critical of the messages that we're bombarded with every day,
Yeah.
especially the ones that offer those quick fixes or blame individuals for problems that are actually systemic.
Exactly. And remembering that success isn't a one-size-fits-all formula.
Hmm.
It's a complex mix of individual effort, sure,
Right.
but also the structures of society and even just plain luck. And
Yeah.
maybe most importantly, recognizing that our worth as human beings isn't tied to our net worth.
Our worth isn't tied to our net worth. I love that that's a powerful reminder.
It is.
And I think it's worth asking ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah.
Do we want one where success is only measured by money and individual achievement?
Right.
Or one that also values things like compassion and cooperation and social justice?
Big questions.
They're big questions.
Yeah.
Kind of brings us back to where we started.
Yeah.
Can we really just believe our way to a better life?
Mm-hmm.
Or does it take something more, something bigger than ourselves?
I think maybe by understanding the history and the complexities of the prosperity gospel,
Yeah.
we can grapple with those questions more thoughtfully and work towards a future that's more just and equitable for everyone.
Yeah, it's been a really insightful conversation. This whole deep dive into the prosperity gospel has been really eye-opening.
Yeah, it shows the power of stories and the human search for meaning, purpose, and yeah, even prosperity.
And it reminds us that, even those narratives that seem simple on the surface
Right.
often have these like hidden depths and unexpected consequences.
Yeah. Absolutely. So as you go about your day, pay attention to the messages you encounter, both the obvious ones and those more subtle cues. And just ask yourself, who benefits from this message?
Right.
What are the assumptions underneath it?
Yeah.
And most importantly, what do you believe?
Great advice. If this deep dive has piqued your interest, I encourage you to explore further.
Yes.
There are tons of resources out there, books, articles, documentaries that delve deeper into this fascinating and often controversial world of the prosperity gospel.
The journey of discovery never really ends.
That's true.
So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.